When did you remember first being aware of the association and your father's role in it?
Well, it's rather vivid in my memory. Our location at 8 Elk Street, and in a way, the organization was a babysitter for me because every member of my family was recruited to work for CSEA when crisis time developed. And that was typically twice a year when we did mailings to the membership. And my father insisted that my mother, my two older sisters, were required, mandated to come in and operate the key punch machines so that we could get the huge mailings done. So my younger brother and I naturally had to come along for the ride. And what I remember most was the manipulation of the elevator. I'll never forget that. For any child, that was amazing to push buttons and go up and down, and it had one of those pull across brass dividers that made it official. And I'll never forget that our location at 8 Elk Street was next door to the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, and call my sense of humor quirky, but it's indelibly etched in my mind that CSEA's headquarters was right next door to the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, and I thought that that was quite apropos. So from my earliest memories, Pat DeMurio, so many of the icons of early CSEA were a very small group, very closely knit, and it was very top down in management. My father ruled the roost, and that's just the way it went for many, many years.
Good. Tell us about how.
Can I move you? I think you moved your chair. Just coming closer to me like this, so Billy's going to be looking for you.
Yeah, okay.
Tell me about how your father first came to work for CSEA and what were those circumstances?
To the best of my recollection, Steve, my father graduated from Christian Brothers Academy in 1930. And it's significant in that he's from the South End, which was a cultural melting pot, and where the South Mall, at least we called it the South Mall when it was built. Now the Empire Plaza had it, the South End originally housed many immigrant groups, and my grandparents were immigrants from Germany, and they didn't have much, and the fact that my father went to Christian Brothers Academy was a huge deal because it required a real strain on the resources of the family to send him there, and it left an indelible impression upon him. So they didn't have the resources for him to go to further his education, and it was in the depths of the Depression, and the organization hired him, I believe, in 1930, not much out of high school, as the first employee of the organization, and it was one of those magic type of scenarios where I think he was born and destined to have that job. And once he sunk his teeth into it, growing the organization was his mission, and that never ended, and up until the time that he left service as the executive director, and certainly beyond. CSEA was in his blood from 1930 until the day he died.
Do you know who actually hired him?
Yes, I believe it was Mr. McDonough, who was the president at the time, and they had a strong bonding, and from what I recollect, They had a tiny cubby hole in the state capitol that they operated out of, and over decades, they slowly but surely gained stature as a lobbying group for public employees, proselytizing for public employees, and trying to make their terms and conditions of employment improved. But because we didn't have recognition as a bargaining agent, this was all done through political channels, as I recollect.
What kind of stories did your father tell you about those early days, and how the organization grew?
Well, I guess he recognized early on that I was the responsible party within the family to answer the phone, and it was a party line, as a matter of fact, at the time, and the phone never stopped ringing at my house, and I was officially designated to be my father's personal assistant, since my sisters wanted nothing to do with it, and my mother, being a CSEA widow at the time, since my father was married actually to CSEA as much as he was to his wife. I handled a lot of the home telephone messages and assured people as sincerely as I could that my father would return the phone call and that they had, in fact, contacted Joe Lochner's residence, but he wasn't available at that time. And Sal Bendet, I will never forget. I'm a youngster, maybe 9 or 10 years old, taking messages from my father, and I would get phone messages from Sal Bendet from the city, and he was notorious as a ball buster. And that's the only term I can think of, and I would have to appease Mr. Bendet, who just would not get off the line and would rant and rave about how CSEA had to do this and CSEA had to do that. And so from my earliest memories, I recall being the individual responsible for taking my father's messages and making sure that he returned his phone calls. Aside from that, it's so clear in my memory that when my father closed the door in his bedroom, he was not to be interrupted. And to make sure you get the context of this, he had a card table set up in his bedroom and stacks of paperwork. And it was really fascinating to me, not because of the content of the paperwork, but because he had this machine that had a big microphone, and it made wax discs, and I think it was a dictaphone, some type of early dictaphone, and he would spend countless hours every weekend in his bedroom with the door shut and with instructions not to interrupt him, and he would go through stacks of paperwork and dictate so that on Monday when he went into the office, he could, give that to his secretaries, and, they could get the word out, whatever the oracle from Albany said. And that's pretty much the way it was. Very top down. He ran the organization, and there was nobody who questioned it.
Tell me a little bit more about his style and personality, because I know as I've looked through documents that he prepared, it certainly looks like he was very organized.
Extremely organized, and I would say that my brother, the CPA, more follows those facets of my father's personality, and I do not. What is interesting is that I definitely feel that my father's sense of humor is something that left a profound impression on me, and also his remarkable communication skills and a facility for getting people to work together. And when they failed to work together, he would yell, scream, and pull his hair out, and then apologize. So I mean, he had a volatile temper. He would scream and yell a lot, but the individuals that I came to know within the organization absolutely loved him. The loyalty was just unbelievable, because at the end of the day, they knew that he was a perfectionist and that he wanted to fulfill the vision of this organization, and that we all played a part in it, and that created that community of interest that we all shared. You know, there was a very, very small organization that I knew as a child growing up. We had not gone through the explosion of growth that pretty much coincided with the Taylor Law's inception in '67.
So, I mean, in those days, just very few employees?
Very few
As you were
employees.
saying, recruiting the family?
Recruiting the
in.
family to do the mailings was pretty standard operating procedure. Everybody was on a first name basis, and there were picnics, not the spectacles that we have today, where we don't have enough of a wide angle lens to get everybody in the picture. But yes, I vividly recall get-togethers with the family of CSEA during the summer, and a very close-knit organization.
Now, if your father started in 1930 and was here well into the 1970s,
Right.
He really presided over some enormous growth in the organization
Yep.
in every conceivable
Yes.
way. I mean, not only in actual membership, but just even in technological change and
Right.
operating circumstances.
No question about it.
How did you see him moving through those transitions?
Well, I really believe that his motivation was providing value to the membership, and giving them some sense that there was, again, that community of interest that they shared as public employees. I mean, that really is the baseline. And since we couldn't bargain collectively, and we're lobbying for the best interests of public employees pre-Taylor Law, then the value of CSEA membership was synonymous, I think, with member benefits. It had, you know, that linkage was key, and that resulted in the development of our group life insurance programs, which to this day are an extremely valued benefit by the membership, and the host of other benefits that flowed from that. Supplemental life, accidental health, and let's see, we had automobile insurance. I mean, we had the gamut of it, and primarily offered through Turbish and Paul, which was our insurance organization out of Schenectady and underwritten by Travelers. And I just remember that because it was so imperative in my father's mind that we offer something of value to the membership at the lowest possible cost and the best possible value. And it seemed like the insurance programs were the ticket, and he was the driving force for that.
How do you know how they went out and sold it?
Yeah, I do, because in 1973, after I graduated from SUNY at Albany, I was an educator, and that was my training. And I really believed that I would go on to a successful career in education, as I had the inspiration from my older sisters who became educators. And when I graduated, after my student teaching, I realized that, yeah, teaching was interesting, but there was an awful lot of action within CSEA. And I heard about it every day. I mean, you couldn't sit down at the kitchen table without my father launching into, a dissertation about what had gone on that day. And he definitely monopolized the conversation. As you can well imagine, he was quite a talker. And I was successful in getting an appointment to work on the CSEA insurance programs in September of 1973, shortly after I graduated from SUNY. And it was a phenomenal opportunity to learn from the ground up the structure of the benefits that CSEA provides to the membership, and it kind of was the litmus test for me. Did I like working with the membership? Could I articulate what the benefits were and explain them in a way that was meaningful to the employees? And it set the stage for appointment to a labor relations specialist, actually an organizer position, when the regions were created in 1975. So that was just a tremendous opportunity to get firsthand knowledge of how benefits worked, how they were underwritten, what employees' eligibility criteria were. And one of the main hooks that CSEA used was, if you sign up within your first X number of days, I don't know, was it 30 days? If you sign up as a member within 30 days, then there's no doctor's examination, and you're guaranteed insurable. Whoever thought that up was a rocket scientist, because it went over extremely well and was very important to getting people to sign up as members.
That was Ed McMahon, wasn't it, that thought that up?
Yeah, right. Really.
I think we were doing it long before we
Yeah,
the scene.
right.
I think, just as kind of an aside, one of the great untold stories of CSEA is how important the insurance program has been to not only the growth of the organization in terms of signing up members, particularly in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but that it also helped lay the groundwork for CSEA when the Taylor Law came into
No doubt.
effect, because on the one hand, employees didn't want to lose the insurance if they didn't select CSEA as their representative, and by the same token, CSEA had an enormous network
Right.
of people who were able to go out and sign up those members because they were already selling them insurance. And I would
Right.
imagine your father was instrumental in setting up that structure for going out and touching the members.
Indeed. It's important to point out that the state side and the local government side not only have a long history, sometimes not a very pleasant history within the organization of getting along and caring about each other's interests, but I believe that for state employees in particular, CSEA positioned itself as an organization in a superb way. We were in the right place at the right time with the right product, and I think that the membership saw that and felt that that was the ticket to move forward. We were well known. We had established a track record as a valued commodity, and it was so early in the collective bargaining process that I think people really didn't exercise a heck of a lot of thought about it. They went with the flow. But in local government, it was much more difficult to ring the bell because management didn't want any time for the employees to meet with representatives of CSEA. It was like pulling teeth, and management would just not grant permission for representatives to meet with employees. It had to be done off company time, whereas the state was much more accommodating and reasonable and with regard to access to employees. And I think, one of the key aspects of the state agreements, probably from the get-go, was that we had access to employees. I mean, without that, you didn't have much, and certainly that was one of the major stumbling blocks in marketing CSEA to local government. So the state kind of led the charge.
Brings up two questions. When you were growing up, do you remember your father traveling a lot?
Yes, and I would occasionally go on trips with him to keep him company. And Buffalo was always a fun time. But yes, he spent a significant time on the road preaching to the elected officers of CSEA and trying to get them to see that collectively we could go a lot further than a parochial organization. So he did a substantial amount of traveling, but it's hard to underestimate the impact of CSEA, of Albany and CSEA, inextricably linked. This is the state capital. This is where a lot of the action took place. And as a lobbying group, if you weren't in Albany trying to get the ear of the legislature, you were nowhere. So, I mean, you had to go out and deal with the membership in various locations. In particular, Long Island and the city were always major headaches for CSEA organizationally. And I'm not sure exactly why, other than maybe people downstate were a little bit more self-actualized. I don't know. But they knew what they wanted. Let's put it that way. They knew that they were paying dues and they wanted CSEA to do something for them, whatever that may be.
Do you think there's a unique CSEA culture?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's no, and I'm not sure how you would define that. There are a lot of layers to it. We've seen the enemy, and it's us. I mean, there's a lot of internal rivalry within CSEA. And I don't think that makes us a unique organization. I think that makes us, like almost any other organization. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I'm my father's son, but I certainly had to endure an awful lot of finger pointing, because of nepotism. Within CSEA, I'm not unique at all. As you probably found out through your interview process, there's a lot of family connections within CSEA. And I think it was, as we were growing as an organization, you reached out to family and friends that you could rely upon that were going to get the job done. And for my part, I just think it was destiny. I trained as an educator, but I knew I wanted to go where the action was. And this was a very exciting time for CSEA in the early 70s. I mean, we had an Irish mafia that was operative at that time. And now, if you go down the list of the names of the people who were movers and shakers within this organization, Corcoran, Conaby, Cooney, Reedy, Naughter, Jace McGraw. I mean, hey, the ringleader, Jace McGraw.
An important one.
Who?
Dolan.
Oh, Dolan, yeah, my father's successor. Oh, yeah, about the culture of CSEA. Cut their balls off before they do yours. As we got bigger, the infighting got more intense. I mean, there's no question about it. But my impression is this, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out those individuals who are not part of the Irish Mafia. Manny Vitale, not Irish, and Harm Switz, who was a legend. So those were the nucleus of people on staff, and they were kick-ass. I mean, their ego knew no boundaries, and they were the pros from Dover. And what did they have in common? Well, aside from being Irish, and a lot of them from Troy, they were all Siena, or most of them were Siena graduates. Maybe all of them were Siena graduates. And my father tapped into that resource, and I think that it paid some real dividends for the organization. They were the best, they were the brightest, and coincidentally, there was an awful lot of people in state government at that point in time that were classmates of theirs. So, I mean, a lot of communication could take place because there wasn't as much stigma involved in doing business with the union, because you knew these people and they were okay. You know, whereas in local government, the union was not looked at as you know, something that you wanted on the premises. And in state government, I think the union was looked at as a resource for change and improving public employees. And if you were in management, that wasn't such a bad thing. So.
And, you know, I guess you could also make the point that as a lot of the things were developed with the state, they found their way to trickle down into local government.
No doubt about it. In '75, when the regions were created, and that was huge. I mean, I remember organizationally how traumatic that was. And I really believe that that was a tremendous testimony to consensus at work. That for us to survive as an organization, we needed to get away from being a central Albany-based organization that dictated how things were going to operate, and that the sense of regions gave each geographic entity an identity. And not that they didn't have one before, but then this really was substantial. And I guess the point is best made by virtue of the fact that the regional office, the Albany regional office, wasn't in headquarters. I think it started in headquarters, but then McDermott was absolutely instrumental in getting the regional office established, and that's where I first went to work. I didn't report to work at headquarters. I reported to work at the brand spanking new regional office on Calvin Avenue. So that was a very, very exciting time. And in my initial years of employment, first 2.5 years of employment as an organizer, I was very, very fortunate to visit virtually every state agency in the Capital District area, get exposed to how they worked, and partially through the insurance background, I had visited some of those in an insurance capacity, but then I got to see how they operated from a labor management point of view, and it gave me such a head up as to how things could work if there was collaboration between the parties. Nothing prepared me for what local government was like, and I don't want to paint it completely black and white, but in my mind, it was, once I became an LRS in '78, with a specifically defined field area, Saratoga, Washington, and Warren counties, it was 90% local government contracts and maybe 10% state. So all I did was local government. And the state agencies had their act together, and they required a minimal amount of my time, whereas local government was a crisis every every minute of every day because they were so clueless on how to do business. It was shocking to me. I'm not just talking about, I mean, everybody, all the stakeholders were clueless. Management didn't want to work with the union at all. The unions were a very unnecessary evil as far as management was concerned, with the exception of school districts, which I think were a little bit more receptive because NICE or NEA, yeah, NEA before NICET was formed, blazed that trail. So the school districts were more supportive of union organizations. Towns, cities, villages, counties, no way, especially not in Saratoga, Warren, and Washington counties, which is a bastion of Republican patronage and power. So,
Very interesting. I mean, was the union seen as threatening that patronage?
absolutely. Enforce civil service law? Why? You know, non-competitive class positions? Are you a Republican? Okay, you got the job. Sheriff deputy? Can you count to 3? Are you a Republican? Well, then here's your gun and your badge. I mean, it really, I don't want to be facetious, but when I say that non-competitive class positions, your drivers in the highway department, your nursing home personnel, your building employees, it was all patronage. And it was who you knew, and that's how you got your job, and management never let you forget it. So, I mean, that was the picture. Now, if you were a competitive class employee, that helped, but, you know, the rule of 3 was, you know, if you have 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, there wasn't any question as to who was going to get the job. You know, and everybody, yeah, I mean, it's a small world. And maybe what we're talking about is the evolution of an organization from a very, very small, tight-knit group that just got bigger, and layer upon layer of complexity was added into the mix. And in particular, local government is what I know, because that's what I spent virtually my entire career doing, was local government.
But it sounds particularly interesting because what you're describing is really the reason why CSEA came into existence in the first place in 1910, which was to
Right.
have some merit and fitness in public employment as opposed to simply a patronage mill.
Absolutely, right. Well, my father never got tired of saying that it was Rocky who delivered on the Taylor Law, and that was a Republican governor. And he never got tired of reminding people that, you know, you have to be pragmatic and support both parties. And we do. And I still maintain that's a pretty good philosophy. So.
Tell me a little bit more now about what you described as the exciting time in the early 70s. I know others have described it as just a time of enormous growth, that there was great opportunity to carve out a niche and to make a name and make a difference in a lot of practical benefits, and just that every time you turned around, the organization was growing in leaps and bounds.
No doubt about it. The cadre of people that I mentioned were hired in the late 60s and were responsible for many, many contracts on the state side and local government. And collectively, they were very charismatic individuals. And the analogy I'd like to make is that at that particular point in time, the membership just was not empowered at all. They had no clue what was going on, and they had an implicit trust that CSEA was going to deliver. And I call it the Lone Ranger effect. These guys, you could hear Sergio, Sergio Leone in the background with the spaghetti westerns. Like Clint Eastwood riding into town, and you'd pan to his face, and he'd grit his teeth, and he'd get off the horse and kick ass. That's what these guys did, and honestly, they were my role models. I mean, I was pretty impressionable at 23 years old when I came on board, and these guys were the ones that I looked up to, and they groomed me to assume that role. And I adapted very quickly to it. And, at the beginning of my career, the membership turned over an amazing amount of power and control to make decisions for them to their LRS or CBS. I was shocked. I just could not comprehend that employees just did not feel equipped to make those decisions. Felt that since I was the emissary from headquarters or the region, that I knew what to do and that I would do it and that things would work out okay. And, I didn't do much to dissuade them from that belief. That's just the way it was, is that there was a lot of ego involved, and we got a lot of things accomplished for the membership because management was not sophisticated. I mean, they hated unions for the most part, but they were not very sophisticated. This was before they hired attorneys to go to the bargaining table on their behalf. And I think that the people CSEA had working for us at the time were not just a half step quicker, they were a full step quicker. And we got accomplished through the collective bargaining process inroads in minimizing management's power that we've enjoyed ever since. And I think that the template of contracts was established in the 70s, and we've been operating off that template ever since. I mean, once the Taylor law determined that you couldn't strike, and that it was 2-for-1 penalties if you did, and and then you put together contracts that focused on due process was key. I mean, part of our strength as an organization was that we effectively represented employees because we knew the due process better than management did. We were more diligent about doing the background investigation, but they caught up eventually and became very good at it themselves. But we had already achieved those contract protections that are kind of taken almost for granted today. Codifying the health insurance, establishing due process and the grievance procedure, access to employees, codifying the benefit structure, and telling management that it was an improper practice to change anything without consulting with us first. So that's how it went.
How did you see the change evolve with the membership becoming more empowered over the course of your career?
I think it was it's easy for me to say that it's a great thing for employees to take ownership of their organization, and I truly believe that. I just wish it was less haphazard. I've had some outstanding officers to work with that I believe that I mentored, and everything I invested in training them, they gave back and more. Unfortunately, we have a high burnout factor with our officers. That's been endemic within CSEA from square one. We have some exceptional people that stick with it long term, but most people have a term or two and they burn out. And, you know, it's just an impossible job appeasing the membership, especially when you're one of their peers. It's tough enough when, you know, you've got the imprimatur of the organization on you. Well, I'm not elected, I'm appointed by the organization, and, you know, this isn't a popularity contest. You know, I'm here to help you because I've got a solid background in labor relations, not because, you know, I throw the best parties or because, you know, other people like me. And I think that the struggle for the membership to take ownership of their contracts and run their units and their locals has been a process that is incomplete, is still, we're working on it organizationally, and we'll probably always continue to work on it. And I used the term Lone Ranger before. The Lone Ranger's dead and buried, and deservedly so. That worked at a time when we were young, but I don't think that it's the right way to approach labor relations and working with the membership now. But we don't have very many A teams. And by A teams, I mean an ensemble cast that can go in there and know what the responsibilities are, take ownership of a contract, go back and sell it to the membership, because this really, you know, you put me on that team to represent your interests, and I'm here to tell you that I did that and I did my job. And, you know, we as a negotiating committee make this recommendation. I look behind me from time to time, and you know, you always felt that your negotiating team, you know, from the moment that you signed the tentative agreement to the time you presented it to the membership, you always wondered where, you know, how much waffling came in and where their fortitude went, because very often they weren't prepared to stand up for what they had done. And it was the LRS who did it and pulled the strings. So, you know, I do think that that we are on the right track. We do a lot of good things with our leadership training. It's never been my role to determine how we spend money as an organization, but I can say that the training of staff is rudimentary. In my opinion, it's very rudimentary, and I think it's effective in what it does, but there's very little in the way of follow-up, and there's not much for seasoned veterans. You're pretty much on your own, you know, to do the best you can within the organization. And I think it's improved somewhat, but that's basically the way it has been.
I think you know, you mentioned something before about your father and his insistence on some pragmatism, and I think it would be
Yeah.
fair to say that that's probably a quality that continues within CSEA to this day, sometimes to the point where perhaps others who might want to be more strident or more activist in the activities might be critical of CSEA, yet there always seems to be a focus on trying to get the job done. How would you look at that situation between trying to strike that balance between activism and pragmatism?
I think exposure, long-term exposure, turns activists into pragmatists. I wish I had a nickel for every activist that was going to change CSEA and set the world on fire through their direct participation as an officer, grievance chair, what have you, because people come in with certain expectations, and certainly managing expectations is the biggest challenge to anybody within the organization. And what I mean by that is that when people pay dues, they project certain expectations. And how it's changed is I pay dues, you do the work. You're paid by CSEA, and I pay my dues, and that's all I have to do. I don't have to do anything more. You do it, because that's what I pay dues for. And fortunately, that mindset has gradually changed so that people recognize, oh, wait a second, if I need to make a contribution to the collective benefit and good of not just the people in my job title, but this bargaining unit as a whole. And they become more experienced, more pragmatic, and more effective the longer they're involved, in my opinion. But the history of CSEA is that, just like immigrants, we have absorbed wave after wave after wave of activists, and a lot of those people have percolated to key positions within the organization and played very, very valuable roles. But I think that precarious balance and blend of keeping, the people that come in here with fire, you want to nurture it and not alienate them. And I think that we've done a pretty good job of welcoming them into the fold and then subtly mentoring them to be effective representatives of the organization. So that process isn't going to change, although my experience is that we're getting grayer and grayer. It's always been leadership that were time tested, but now within the organization, it's, I'm really worried about the brain drain. I make no bones about it, that I don't know where some of the institutional memory is going to come from when Don Kelly leaves, when a Dave Stack leaves. I mean, I'm forever grateful to Dave Stack for managing my retirement portfolio, believe me, up until the time I could take responsibility for it myself. There are icons within this organization that I don't know how we're ever going to replace. We will, but those are two that come immediately to mind.
Kind of an interesting point to kind of go back to your Father's Day too, though, with some of the expertise, because while you talked about there being a small staff,
Yeah.
there was also a relationship with a very effective and well-known Albany law firm that represented the interests of the organization on the outside.
Yeah, what would a conversation about CSEA's history be without Romer and Feathers, right?
Well, I was thinking of
Or
George
Reich,
DeGraff Foy.
DeGraff Foy, yeah. Absolutely.
Literally with a relationship that goes back to the 30s.
Oh, no doubt about it. Jack Rice was one of my idols growing up, and he remains so to this day, although I haven't maintained communication with him, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant, cockeyed or not. He was just a tremendous strategist and wired. And, we had outstanding legal representation through the DeGraff Foy firm. And as I recall, Rice was really, in my recollection, the ringleader. And Jim Romer was on board with the firm, and I knew Jim because I was the paper boy on Palmer Boulevard, and his dad and family lived on Palmer Boulevard in Westmere, suburb of Albany, and so I knew Jim slightly. He was an adequate basketball player and member of the DeGraff law firm, and saw an opportunity to insinuate himself into that dynamic and successfully staged a coup d'etat that resulted in him being our chief counsel. So that was an amazing time. And, that whole controversy between having an in-house and an out-house law firm, we could go on forever. But maybe the best thing that Romer brought to the table was feathers. I mean, Jim Featherstone Ha was equally, people would form an impression of Jim when they met him. He was about 5'6", and he prematurely bald, and didn't seem to have that much charisma. Whereas Romer was 6'3", prematurely gray, but looked like a senator, had the embroidered shirts, and I mean, he epitomized what an attorney should be. And when they were together, the synergy between those two was absolutely amazing. That was our golden period, as far as I'm concerned, as far as legal representation. They were the pros from Dover. But what's underestimated, in my opinion, was Feathers. Feathers knew and was wired to the governor's office, and he was, and is to this day, one of the most admired lobbyists, bar none, in New York State. So, I definitely recall all of the battles organizationally as it related to the law firm, and the fact that Joe McDermott was right in the thick of that situation, our former regional president and president of CSEA, and I don't know how to qualify the impact of McDermott other than to say the first day that I was employed, I met Joe, shook his hand, and I never forgot it. And he was a real shrewd power broker, and he aligned himself very closely with the law firm. They took very good care of him and provided a lot of good insight and judgment, I think, to not only Joe McDermott, but to the organization as a whole. And then, we subsequently went to an in-house law firm, and I think that that's worked very effectively for us. But, as far as shoot 'em up, bang, bang, and, getting things done and having clout, Romer and Featherstone Ha were really the big two.
8 minutes on
8
this
minutes to
tape
go?
if that's what
Okay.
you're wondering.
That's what I was wondering. Let me ask you to talk a little bit more about Joe McDermott, because obviously you had a very good relationship with him
Oh,
over
yeah.
many years.
I did.
Tell me how you saw him grow and change. He was somebody who, as you say, was region president at CSEA and a vital force. He became executive vice president and eventually president of the organization. How did you see his evolution?
Joe was, first of all, he was with the Department of Transportation. And these are subtle things, but you can't discount them. Bill Hennessy was the director of DOT. He's also my baseball coach. in full disclosure here, Featherstone Ha married me the first time too, and divorced me the first, and helped divorce me the first time. So, I mean, I knew these people real well, and it was quite an eye-opening experience for a young kid to be around these very charismatic people. But charisma is not what you think of with Joe McDermott, not at all. He was a poker player, very bright, but because he worked for the Department of Transportation in a PS&T position, he had juice. I think that he had carte blanche to do whatever he needed to do as regional president, and this was pretty much unheard of. But Bill Hennessy subsequently became the statewide Democratic chair, and all I can say is that he was an incredibly bright guy that had a personality so big, and it permeated down within his selections to HR and how management and the union dealt with one another. And Joe McDermott benefited from that immeasurably because he could pretty much come and go and do whatever he damn well pleased on behalf of CSEA. It's not that he had a no-show job, but he was very wired throughout the Capital District region. And once again, he was a PS&T employee, and I think that Wenzel certainly was the individual that is the personification of, the scholarly, educator that was from, well, it was from the education department, as I recall, and tall, commanding presence, and follow me, and we enjoyed some outstanding leadership from the ranks of the PS&T, which is why when we subsequently lost the decert of the PS&T, there were some questions as to whether or not we were going to survive as an organization, and we did very successfully. I think we shocked ourselves and a lot of other people that we were able to get over that and develop new leadership, but there's linkage there. There's a bridge. McDermott was the bridge, in my opinion. His only I don't think he made a lot of mistakes. I think that he recruited some very good people that were close to him. Michelle Agnew was my secretary when I first started within the region. Of course, she was everybody's secretary, but McDermott's as well. And Joe brought her along with him, and she wielded a lot of power, both at headquarters and within the region. Joe was successful in getting his agenda across and pulled an awful lot of strings, and a lot of people said, yeah, Joe, I'll do that for you. He was a very well organized, shrewd politician. That's just the way I remember him. And he was, he had a reputation as being a real hard ass for staff. I never really, I was out on a strike, our first strike against the organization, and McDermott was the focal point of that, and there's an awful lot of dissension and hard feelings, and he crossed the picket line, yada yada yada. Well, he had to wear a couple different hats, and I'm not an apologist for McDermott. I will say this, that he treated me fairly, and I thought that he was an effective individual and moved the organization forward. And I'm not going to fault him for Jack Corcoran, because my father hired Corcoran, and that was the biggest mistake that he ever made, and he admitted that, and to me and anybody else that would listen to him. But he made that particular bed, and then the rest of us had to lie in it.